Now, the Prime Minister will be holding his daily down.
Hello folks, welcome to the apocalypse. I'm your host for the apocalypse, the man with the hair. It's really bad at the minute actually, I probably need to give that a wash. But we're live now with the Chancellor. He's going to make an important announcement about the future of self-employed people in this country. He looks a bit surprised to be there.
Good afternoon. Today I can announce the next step in the economic fight against the coronavirus pandemic with new support for the self-employed. Our step-by-step action plan is aiming to slow the spread of coronavirus so fewer people need hospital treatment at any one time, protecting the NHS's ability to cope. At every point, we have followed expert advice to be controlled in our actions, taking the right measures at the right time. We are taking unprecedented action to increase NHS capacity by increasing the number of beds, key staff, and life-saving equipment on the front line to give people the care they need. That is why it is absolutely critical
Rebecca,
that people follow our instructions to stay at home so that we
Big Ears is live.
save lives. Our action plan to beat this pandemic is the right thing to do, but we know that people are worried about their jobs and their incomes. Working closely with businesses and trade unions, we have put together a coherent, coordinated, and comprehensive economic plan. A plan which is already starting to make a difference. Big employers like Woodcock, Timpsons and Pret have already said that our coronavirus jobs retention scheme means they will protect thousands of jobs. And we are publishing this evening detailed guidance on how the scheme will operate so that other businesses can protect jobs too.
Hi Dave.
Small businesses are already benefiting from the coronavirus business interruption loans of up to £5 million, which are interest-free for 12 months, with 30,000 inquiries in just 4 days. Local authorities are already informing over 700,000 retail, hospitality and leisure businesses that they will pay no business rates this year. And the new hardship grant scheme, providing cash grants of up to £25,000 for the smallest businesses, is now up and running. So if any business is struggling and worrying they may need to lose staff, I would urge you to log on to businesssupport.gov.uk and look very carefully at what support is available before deciding to lay people off. I'm proud of what we've done so far, but I know that many self-employed people are deeply anxious about the support available for them. Musicians and sound engineers, plumbers and electricians, taxi drivers and driving instructors,
and resellers
and childminders,
and
many
resellers.
others,
Resellers.
no fault of their own, risk losing their livelihoods. To you, I say this: you have not been forgotten. We will not let you behind. We all stand together. So to support those who work for themselves, today I'm announcing a new self-employed income support scheme. The government will pay self-employed people who have been adversely affected by the coronavirus a taxable grant worth 80% of their average monthly profits over the last 3 years, up to £2,500 a month.
Ain't going to help any of them as recently self-employed.
This scheme will be open to people across the UK for at least 3 months, and I will extend it for longer if necessary. You'll be able to claim these grants and continue to do business. And we're covering the same amount of income for a self-employed person as we are for furloughed employees, who also receive a grant worth 80%. That's unlike almost any other country and makes our scheme one of the most generous in the world. Providing such unprecedented support for self-employed people has been difficult to do in practice, and the self-employed are a diverse population, with some people earning significant profits. So I've taken steps to make this scheme deliverable and fair. To make sure that the scheme provides targeted support for those most in need, it will be open to anyone with trading profits of up to £50,000. To make sure only the genuinely self-employed benefit, it will be available to people who make the majority of their income from self-employment. And to minimise fraud, only those who are already in self-employment who have a tax return for 2019 will be able to apply. 95% of people who are majority self-employed will benefit from this scheme.
Yeah, you're screwed if you didn't do a tax return last year.
Urgently, and expect people to be able to access the scheme no later than the beginning of June. If you're eligible, HMRC will contact you directly, ask you to fill out a simple online form, then pay the grant straight into your bank account. And to make sure no one who needs it misses out on support, we have decided to allow anyone who missed the filing deadline in January 4 weeks from today to submit their tax return. Though I know many self-employed people are struggling right now, so we've made sure that support is available. Self-employed people can access the business interruption loans. Self-assessment income tax payments that were due in July can be deferred to the end of January next year. And we've also changed the welfare system so that self-employed people can now access universal credit in full. A self-employed person with a non-working partner and 2 children living in the social rental sector can receive welfare support.
Georgina's happy.
£1,800 a month. The scheme I've announced today is fair. It is targeted at those who need it the most. Crucially, it is deliverable. And it provides an unprecedented
Anyone who's become self-employed since then, that's going to struggle, suffer.
The scheme, I'm grateful for the conversations I've had with the Federation of Small Businesses, the Association of Independent Professionals of the Self-Employed, and a range of trade unions, including the Trades Union Congress. But I must be honest, devising this scheme in response to many calls for support, it is now much harder to justify the inconsistent contributions between people of different employment statuses. If we all want to benefit from state support, we must all pay in equally in future. These last 10 days have shaken our country and economy as never before.
Yep, so if you've been dodging tax, you're
In the last
screwed.
2 weeks, we have put aside ideology and orthodoxy to mobilise the full power and resources of the British state. We have done so in the pursuit of a single goal: to protect people's health and economic security by supporting public services like our NHS, backing businesses, and protecting people's jobs and incomes.
I work for the tax office, so I have no time for people who dodge tax. It takes money out of my pocket.
Of the British state and by any government anywhere in the world. We have pledged that whatever the resources the NHS needs,
it's not fair to people who just become self-employed in this tax year, though. They're going to get nothing from anybody. They have to go straight onto benefits.
Deferred more than £30 billion of tax payments until the end of the year. Agreed nearly 17,000 time to pay arrangements.
Thank God I didn't go full-time reselling this year.
£333 billion of loans and guarantees. Introduced cash grants of up to £25,000 for small business properties. Covered the cost of statutory sick pay for small and medium-sized businesses for up to 2 weeks per employee. Lifted the incomes of over 4 million households with a nearly £7 billion boost to our welfare system. Agreed a 3-month mortgage holiday with lenders and nearly £1 billion more support for renters through the local housing allowance. And today, we've announced one of the most generous self-employed support schemes anywhere in the world. Despite these extraordinary steps, there will be challenging times ahead. We will not be able to protect every single job or save every single business. But I am confident that the measures we have put in place will support millions of families, businesses, and self-employed people to get through this. Get through it together and emerge on the other side, both stronger and more united. Thank you. I think if we can take some questions from the media, turning first to Laura Kunsberg from the BBC.
This is where he turns and looks at the TV now.
Thanks very much, Chancellor. You've said you hope to cover nearly all of the self-employed, but what about people who this scheme does not cover? And when do you hope the money will start coming through? And if I may, we've been really inundated with worries from people who feel they're not safe at work. We had a message from someone saying their employer was forcing people. They said, everyone knows it's wrong, but we are being emotionally blackmailed by bosses saying if we don't come to work, people will lose their jobs. As the Chancellor, what do you say to employers who are flouting the rules like that? And to the Deputy CMO, if I may, when do you now expect the peak of the virus to be for the most up-to-date information you have, please?
Thanks, Laura. To your first question, this scheme, if you look at people who make the majority of their earnings from self-employment, this scheme will cover 95% of them. Of the people that it does not cover, that last 5%, those above the income threshold that we set,
Or the recently self-employed,
are about £200,000. So we think what we've done is reasonable, proportionate and fair, and as I said, covers 95% of all self-employed people who make the majority of their earnings from self-employment. So I think it is a very generous scheme in that regard.
but presumably, if you're paying that rent, you're paying it out of your profit, you're still paying yourself a wage afterwards. So what we're saying is you will get 80% of your wage.
Something that we can't deliver today. As I've said before, this is operationally complicated. We are already designing brand new schemes to cover the 90% of the population that are employed. Here, we need to design
Obviously, if you run a leaner operation from home, you'll probably get more money, but
their tax return yet from January, an opportunity to do so to benefit from this scheme. And
I won't get a penny from it because I've got my full-time income, which is the majority of my income. So the cowshed rent will still remain unpaid.
And I'll turn to Jenny to answer your second question around workplace guidance and the virus timing.
So I think on the workplace guidance, it's really important that employers, most of whom have been extraordinarily supportive, I think, of their employees, stick to the normal principles of workplace health. We've made it very clear, I think, what those principles are. If people can work from home, they should be able to. If they can't, there may be adaptations that they can do in the workplace.
Yeah, Jack, but then I'd ask the question of how those people are earning money to buy food and whatever else if they're not making any money and they're full-time self-employed.
Health requirements in the middle of this outbreak. Actually, the same principles about workplace safety apply.
But of course, they're living off their existing savings, which is going to be difficult for them.
On the issue of the peak in the epidemic, I'm sure you will not be surprised to know that I am not going to predict a precise timing for that. And the reason for that is we are only just starting to see a bite, if you like, in the interventions, the social distancing that have been put into place. It would be far too early to predict that. I think we are starting to see some helpful movement, let's put it that way, and what we would be looking for is a change in the slope rather than being a very steep curve upwards. We will be looking for it to be a gentler slope, but we must not take.
Would have loved it to be based on turnover, though.
Really cooperative.
They've got some money then.
The public have really understood that this is something very serious, and their actions, wherever they are, will save lives. So
yeah, it's all got to be paid for at some point. Absolutely, LGG.
Thank you. Could turn next to Beth Rigby from Sky.
Thank you, Chancellor. A question for you on your scheme. A big scheme, but you can't get the money until June. You're telling people that they can apply for universal credit, but there's a 5-week wait for the first payment. Can you guarantee to people watching this who are in immediate and desperate need that if they apply for universal credit, that they will get an advance payment in 10 days or less to tide them over? And a question, if I may, to the Deputy CMO, how many NHS staff are currently unable to work because they are unwell or self-isolating? It's obviously an area of huge concern for everyone. Thank you.
Beth, to your question about people's immediate cash flow needs, to which of course we're sympathetic to. We've done a couple of things with regard to universal credit. First, making it just more accessible, particularly for those who are self-employed, and more generous in that regard overall, in terms of the measures I've already announced. But in terms of speed, it is already the case, and the Department for Work and Pensions are highly focused on this, that people can get an advance payment almost immediately after the claim. So they do not have to wait for the 5 weeks. An advance payment can be given almost immediately, certainly within days. That's very much what they are already doing. On top of that, we have deployed extra resources into local authorities, particularly to help those who are most vulnerable with things like their council tax bill, which for many families is a very large bill that they
Don't
pay.
ask where those resources came from.
So local authorities now are in receipt of the extra money we've given them, and they can work in their own communities to identify those most vulnerable families that you talked about and ensure they get a little bit of extra help to help tide through the difficult few weeks and months ahead.
So I don't have the precise figure with me this afternoon in relation to NHS staffing, but I'm sure my NHS colleagues would do. I think the important thing is I do recognise that there are a significant number of staff who are absolutely doing the right thing, as the rest of the public are, in taking themselves out of the workforce if they are symptomatic, and maintaining the safety for the rest of the public, but particularly the vulnerable patients. And I think we have to recognise and support that. The two things we have been doing to try and improve that as we go forward, that is the right thing to do, but we can help everybody, I think. Number one, to be clear on what the workplace guidance is, and there is some very helpful guidance through the NHS, but particularly for people with in the vulnerable group, if you like, with underlying conditions. I think some people have interpreted that if they're healthy and well but have an underlying
Now they've
condition,
announced this.
needing to stay right out of the workforce.
There's nothing to stop them announcing further lockdown measures. Coronavirus Act has become bill has become an act of Parliament. So I think either tomorrow or Monday, there's definitely going to be some more interesting news coming out.
And the frontline responders, for example, in police and other first-line response systems. And that's because we recognise that knowing whether people have had the disease or not brings people back into the workplace now, but it also means we know what our resilience is going forward as we move into the depths, really, of the...
You won't get anything, Jack, if you haven't submitted your a tax return.
Next to Robert Peston, ITV. Afternoon, Robert.
Oh, hello. So my connection doesn't seem to be unstable, so I'll give it a go. So what about the many people who've only recently entered the workforce, might not have 3 years of accounts, and not even 1 year of accounts? How can they get help? Secondly, how long do you expect the scheme to run for? Do you have an estimated cost per month of the scheme? And finally, did I hear you right that when we're through this, you intend to equalise tax and national insurance between employment and self-employment, essentially as a sort of form of natural justice, since they're all being bailed out, all of us are being bailed out on the same basis? And then finally, for the deputy CMO,
Won't get anything from it, Richard, unfortunately, in that scenario.
The big problem in terms of ramping up testing is a world shortage of the bits and the kits. Why didn't we order the kits weeks ago when this first emerged as a problem? Why did we wait till everybody else had ordered kits?
Robert, what was your first question exactly? It cut out for a second.
Oh, sorry. So the first question is, significant numbers of people have only entered the self-employment workforce recently, and they won't have accounts. They certainly won't have 3 year accounts. They won't even have 1 year of accounts. How are you going to help them?
So what we will do is, for those that don't have 3 years, we will look at whatever they do, whether it's 1, 2, or 3. But since we're looking at trading profit to partnership profit, obviously those can be volatile year to year. So where people do have more than 1 year, we will look to average out over the years. That was something that many people called for, because it seems a sensible thing to do to smooth out that volatility. If people only have 1 year, we will be forced to only look at the 1 year. for people who we don't know anything about, there is really nothing we can do, and that's one of the complicated things we've been wrestling with. I think most people accept that we have to use the database of people we know about and that have filed tax returns. That's the population that we have that I talked to, those that filed tax returns in January 31st of this year, or the late filers, which we'll give 4 weeks to. For those who are very recently self-employed, we cannot operate a scheme like this. There is just too much complexity, both operationally and fraud risk with that. So we would have to say to those people, please look at the extra support we put into the welfare system to help you at this time. But as I said, this covers the vast majority of people. In terms of the time frame for the scheme, what we've said is analogous to the employed scheme. We would do this for 3 months. So obviously, if we are able to make payments to people at the beginning of June, they would receive 3-month payments at that one time, backdated to March, completely comparable to the employed scheme. And with regard to your question on tax, I think the broader point I would make is, rather than be too specific right now about the future tax policy, it's just an observation that there is currently an inconsistency in contributions between self-employed and employed. And obviously the actions taken today, which is very significant tens of billions of pounds of support for those who are self-employed, treating them the same way as those who are employed, it does just throw into light that question of inconsistency and whether that is fair to everybody going forward, especially as we look when we get through this and we're all chipping in together to right the ship afterwards, making sure that everyone is doing their bit as well. And I think that's a very fair and reasonable observation to make at this time. And I'll hand over to Jenny.
Yeah, tough times, Jack. Tough times.
In relation to testing, so I think with all of these, whether it be testing or PPE, we have ordered. And
I do have an April 2019 tax return, but I already know I'll just go on it and go, oh, he's got full-time income. I ain't going to get anything.
This is a brand new event. It's a pandemic, and every single country is ordering at the same time. And many of the reagents and the items that are used are coming from some single suppliers, but many from international suppliers, many of whom have actually been affected themselves by the pandemic. So I think this is not an issue of a lack of forethought in planning. It is an unprecedented event. And I think a few other points which are worthwhile thinking about. It is a brand new virus, so even to understand how you might test it, you need to have the virus and understand a little bit about it before you can start. And there is also a point which is really important. Whilst we're dealing with coronavirus, so colleagues in Public Health England, for example, on a day-to-day basis, still need to manage all the other individual infections which are in the country. And some of those will be of higher significance, a higher risk for individual people. So it would be wrong for us to be moving, for example, stock from our daily work into this. I mean, on a final point, and I think Chief Medical Officer made the point yesterday, the evaluation of this is absolutely critical. So we do have evaluations running now, and I recognise we all want to see these testing programmes very active, but it is vitally important that when we have a test, we know it does what we want it to do, not that we have incorrect information.
Thank you. Could we turn next to Jason Groves from the Daily Mail?
Thanks, Chancellor. Can I ask, you said I think that this scheme will come into force in June. What self-employed people are supposed to live on until then? And also pick up Robert's point on the future tax treatment. Without getting into too much detail, which you obviously can't do at this stage, is it fair to say that you're warning the self-employed that they may well have to pay more tax in the future? And a question for Jenny Harris. Can I ask there's millions of us now cooped up in our houses. Are you at all worried about the kind of health impacts of that? We've seen kind of supermarket food aisles split bare. Are you worried about the impact of mental health problems, obesity, drink problems in this crisis?
Jason, to your first question on timing, I refer to what I said previously. We've looked very hard at the quickest possible way to deliver this. We are already delivering a brand new system to deal with the employment scheme that we've set up, which covers 90% of the population. That will be up and running by the end of April to ensure that those businesses can meet their payroll in April and use that scheme to pay their furloughed workers. It is ultimately the same group of people, the same systems that need to do this. provision to allow people who are late in filing their tax returns in January, 4 weeks from today, the opportunity to file their tax returns and benefit from this scheme. That also will have some impact on timing, which again, I think is a reasonable and sensible trade-off to make in the circumstances. They will get 3 months in one go in June, which obviously will be welcome. And as I said, we have made available multiple other avenues of support in the interim for this population of people, very considerable investments both in the welfare system through local councils and other tax deferrals. And with regard to thing, again, I'm not anticipating future policy. I'm just making the observation that I think it is harder to sustain the argument that if you're employed and paying a higher rate of tax on the basis that you are treated differently, and now we're treating everybody the same and at a very, very significant cost, that we as a country and as a society, as we get through this, and all together are figuring out, once we get through this, how we then right the ship afterwards. This is an observation that I think is eminently fair to make now at this point, and then we can discuss in the future, how best we all come together to get through this and as I said, to right the ship and make sure that we get everything back on track again.
Thank you. So yes, I mean, I personally and many of my public health colleagues have made it very clear that we recognise that there are potential mental health risks as well, that we need to be looking after our bodies and our minds at the same time. That particularly applies to our very high risk vulnerable group who we have asked to almost take themselves out of society for 12 weeks. That's a really big ask. And it's why in the letters which have gone out to them, there are specific links and suggestions around mental health and mental health welfare, linking with Evermind Matters, all sorts of links to do that. But I might actually put a more optimistic view as well, which is if people are not going out to work, and often that actually creates quite a stress in terms of travel time, they have more free time to themselves. And it might be the best opportunity the whole country has to say, I'm going to use my one exercise session every day to ensure that by the time this is over, I am super fit and so is my family. And in fact, if you have something restricted, it suddenly becomes quite a pleasurable event. So even though you may not have wished to jog along the street before,
yeah, I'm going bloody running as soon as I'm recovered from this illness.
Thank you. George Parker from the FT.
Thank you, Chancellor. You've made no secret at all of the fact that the scheme has been very difficult to design. Would you accept that it's open to abuse? For example, people claiming the money and then basically sitting at home. But what would you say to people thinking of potentially abusing?
How is claiming the money and sitting at home abuse? That's exactly what the government wants to happen, you muppet. Christ. It's the whole reason why they're paying people, because they want the people to sit at home. Oh.
And a quick question to the Deputy CMO. I don't think we've ever really had a public explanation of why this country decided to stop testing people who are suffering with symptoms of coronavirus when certainly when the World Health Organization is advocating this policy, and many other Asian countries have done this with great success.
George, thank you. On your first question first about the scheme, we are designing these things at pace, as you rightly identified. Given the circumstances, I don't think we should let the perfect be the enemy of the good. We accept that has some challenges. That's why we put some of the conditionality into the scheme to limit some of the risks that you identified. For example, making this for people who have an actual tax return that we can look at, so we know that there are real people who are genuinely self-employed and not just telling us out of the blue that they are. That's kind of very obvious check. There will be a form that people will have to fill in. We will contact them because we can identify them ourselves who we think should be eligible. We will ask them to apply and check a few other boxes just to confirm, to your point, that they are still trading and some other things, which we can then later verify as well. So we will be able to actually put in place some sensible compliance measures in that regard. To your second point, and that's a very excellent point, that we've obviously put in place
Hi, Jennifer.
different loan guarantee schemes to provide credit to corporate UK. There was an issue with the commercial paper facility that we had originally set up at the Bank of England, as it was for people who had an investment grade rating. There are perfectly good private companies that are credit worthy but don't have that rating. What we have done is work with the Bank of England to find a workaround for that, so that we can impute a credit rating from the company's individual relationships with their banks, and in that way construct a rating. We think that will significantly increase the addressable number of companies that can now benefit from that scheme. The details of that are imminently about to be published. And I thank the Bank of England for working with us constructively on that. And what it will mean is that between the coronavirus business interruption loan scheme at the bottom end, the companies up to £45 million of turnover, and the commercial paper facility on the top end, we will now be covering 80% of UK employment and 80% of corporate UK turnover with those two schemes. That still does leave a small 20% gap in the middle. We are finding ways to try and address that gap as well. Obviously, that's a little bit more challenging because by definition, those companies are not as creditworthy, and this is taxpayer money we're putting on the line. So we need to make sure that there is some way that we are protected in that regard. But I think now that we have an improved commercial paper scheme, we've got 80% of employees.
What does it mean, Steve? It means basically they'll look at your last tax return, and if you've submitted one before that, well, it's up to 3 tax returns. I'll look across your last 3 tax returns if you've got 3, work out your average profit, and give you a grant of 80% of that. Basically.
In fact, we need to realise that the clue for WHO is in its title. It's a World Health Organisation, and it is addressing all countries across the world.
So if you'd made 30 grand profit in the last 3 years,
we have
10 grand a year, they'd give you, what, 8 grand, I reckon? Well, obviously split by 3 months, so that'd be what? I can't even do the maths at the minute.
And some of our epidemiologists have gone out to Manila, for example, to support the early response in that area. So the point there is that they are addressing every country, including low and middle income countries. So encouraging all countries to test of some type. When you come to the UK, we have made it very, very clear there has been a plan right the way through this, which is entirely consistent with the science and epidemiology. We started with a containment phase, and every early case of this disease was followed through. Every contact was traced exactly as we would do for other diseases, but particularly noticing this one. And of course, the viewers will be very familiar with the fact that we had some very strict and very successful containment facilities. But there comes a point in the pandemic where that is not an appropriate intervention, and that is the point really where we moved. We moved into delay, and although we still do some contact tracing and testing, for example, in high-risk areas like prisons or care homes, that is not an appropriate mechanism as we go forward. At that point, what we need to do is focus on the clinical management of the patients first and foremost, and then additionally, as I've said earlier, on our health and care staff and first responder staff. So obviously, if there was infinite testing facilities, and we are growing them at pace, and we will have them, then it moves to the public. But we need to be very careful about focusing where it's.
As who died?
And to Anna McLover from the Telegraph.
Christ, she's fit. Can't hear a word she's saying, mind. Oh, the technology works.
Sorry, we can't hear you.
Hello, does that work?
Yes, we can now.
So, Chancellor, when you look at the US unemployment figures from today and the number of people claiming universal credit here, does it make you concerned that the cure could be worse than the virus? And secondly, the Deputy CMO
bloody
previously
Trump's
suggested
word in that.
lockdown could continue on and off for 6 months. Are you concerned that the economy could be destroyed by then? And a quick question for the Deputy CMO. Public Health England said 1 million members of the public are going to be sent self-testing kits at home. Who will these people be? How will you choose them? And what will happen to their test results?
And obviously, I have seen the numbers both in the US and indeed here, and of course they're very worrying. These are people's livelihoods, their jobs, their financial security, which is now being severely damaged. I'm very cognizant of that. That's why we have acted, I think, at incredible speed to put together a number of different packages of support to protect people's jobs and income.
I've been talking to you.
Provide them with financial
I've answered Steve's question.
Challenging few weeks and months. There's no two ways about that. But we are taking the advice from our medical and scientific advisors. It is the right strategy where we make the right decisions at the right time to protect people's lives, but also control the spread of this virus to a level where we can cope with it, which then allows us from a position of strength to decide how best to manage things from that point forward. But I absolutely acknowledge this is going to be challenging. People's lives and economic livelihoods are going to be impacted, but I do believe the measures of support that we've put in place will make an enormous difference to helping to alleviate some of that hardship. And I think to your, I think Jenny, do you want to, yeah.
And I was going to pick up, I think the point about lockdown was it potentially is taken out of the context in the sense that what I was saying was we may see measures of lockdown going forward over the next 6 months. That would not be an implausible outcome, but I also said, I think, that as we're watching the curve, it may be possible, definitely not now because we're only just starting to get some benefit from this, but it may be possible to start moving that. So the issue here is about, exactly as we have done all the way through with this, is about watching the epidemiology and flexing those interventions at the right time in the right place to deliver what we need. And obviously, I think the whole country, myself included, will want to be back to normal as soon as we can. So I think that mentioning 6 months, it's to give a general look forward about the sorts of length of this type of pandemic. But we have to remember also that we have, if we are successful, we are lessening the spike on the curve and we are pushing it forward. So success in some ways means pushing it forward, but not necessarily with the strengthened interventions that we have at the moment all the way through. So that would be the first point. And I don't precisely recognise the quote that you were talking about in relation to Public Health England, but I think there are 2 points probably. One is we will want to understand very quickly the ways
That's my steamer
around the country and through different elements
that I don't know how to use.
So it may be that quote was in relation to work which will almost certainly go forward in due course, understanding with a proportionate sample of the population who has had the disease and who has not, and that will give us a strong clue as to when we know when the outbreak may end completely. So it's about understanding through different age groups and different vulnerable groups what has happened, which you cannot do consistently for absolutely everybody, a whole population in the middle of an outbreak. But I think in relation to other testing and who gets it and who doesn't, I think I've probably answered that with the earlier one. The absolute point here is it is clinical benefit. It is the people who are going into hospital, into our intensive care units with acute respiratory distress syndrome and pneumonia, the same into the wards, and then those high-risk areas, and then onto our healthcare workers.
Thank you. Thank you. We're out of time. So just in conclusion, if I could say, today was about providing reassurance to the millions of people who are self-employed and are anxious about their security and their livelihoods. I think by any international standard, the package that we have outlined today represents one of the most generous and comprehensive ways to support those in self-employment anywhere in the world. And I would conclude by saying this to all of those who are self-employed, who are rightly anxious and worried about the next few months. You haven't been forgotten. We will not leave you behind, and we are all in this together. Thank you.
The Chancellor there, Rishi Sunak, ending that news conference, which was about 40 minutes or so long. He was also at the podium there with the Deputy Chief Medical Officer, Jenny Harris, taking questions on the government's plans to help the self-employed and freelancers get through the economic crisis caused because of the economy being effectively shut down as a result of the pandemic. Lots of criticism of the government because plans for the self-employed and freelancers weren't included in his original statement on what the government was going to do a week or so back, but now he has come forward and he's talking about a taxable grant worth something like 80% of taxable profits for the last 3 years. Let's just recap exactly what he said. These are the main points. of his statement helping those unemployed. He said that it would be one of the most generous policies anywhere in the world, and the measures would come into effect from June. As I say, including a taxable grant, which would cover 80% of average earnings over the past 3 years, up to a cap of £2,500 a month, and it would be open to those with trading profits of up to £50,000. Let's chat to our political correspondent Helen Catt, who's at Westminster for us now. Helen, as I say, the government came in for a bit of stick because it didn't mention those in the gig economy, the self-employed, freelancers and so on in their original statement about how they were going to help people get through this appalling economic crisis. One suspects that for freelancers and the self-employed, they might feel he's finally delivered.
Well, yeah, particularly in Westminster, they were looking for two things really. How much was the chancellor going to offer people who are self-employed, and how quickly is he going to get it to them? So the calls had been for him to match what he offered people who are employed through companies, as announced last week, and that was that 80% of their wages. He does appear to have matched that with the 80% of the average monthly profits over the last 3 years, and that's capped at the same level at that £2,500. I think that's going to broadly be welcomed. There are some restrictions on this, though. This is only for people who have trading profits of up to £50,000. That it forms the majority of their employment, and they must have already filed a tax return for 2019. Now, the Chancellor says that will cover 95% of people who are in self-employment. So I think that the measures of how much he's going to pay will be largely welcomed here in Westminster. However, the other thing they were looking for was how quickly the money would be coming to people who are self-employed, because we've seen their incomes drop dramatically for some people.
That's it then. So, if you've submitted a tax return in 2019, you can apply for a grant if you had profits up to 8% of your profit, and it's up to 50k. And they will look at your last 3 tax returns back from 2019. If you've only submitted 2 back from 2019, they can only look at 2. If you've only submitted 1, they can only look at 1. It's got to be your primary source of income as well. That's pretty much it. If you check gov.uk/coronavirus, more details will be published on there anyway. Read at your leisure. Further details or clarifications will probably come out tomorrow. I'll get nothing, but I wasn't expecting to get anything, so I'm not bothered about that. Anyone who started after the 2019 tax return deadline won't get anything, unfortunately, from this scheme, and are advised to claim for universal credit and other such benefits. That's pretty much it. Thanks for watching, folks. See you all again soon. Take care. Bye for now.